Alrighty, good morning, and let's get things started. So we've got 9 games on the schedule tonight. This is a busy night for by this week's standards. Whoever did the scheduling for March, good job. And yet there's one team I noticed. I was looking ahead. I thought, well, all right, let's see how they're doing, how they could do from here. And they've got a relatively easy schedule from here. And I'm not even talking about Tampa. Thought it would be Tampa that I said had the really easy schedule, but looking at it, nope. But we'll get to that. Boston's at home to Detroit tonight. Boston's got a 40-15-8 record. Detroit's got a 26-29-10 record. They're 3-6-1. Jared Coro is getting his first start of the night. They're 5th in the Atlantic. They're 1 point ahead of Montreal. Boston's 7-3 in their last 10. Hudobin's getting the start. McAvoy now is out at least 4 weeks. I put up 4 to 6 because it's sprained MCL or ACL, so I'll say 4 to 6 weeks. They're in second place. They're 3 points ahead of Toronto. It definitely has been a trying time for me as a fan, in that McAvoy and Besser are both hurt right now. So my two favorite players, my favorite active player right now is Bo Horvat. But this game kind of makes me a little nervous, and I'll say why. Detroit comes in 3 games below 500 over this season. They haven't fallen further than that, below 500. I would guess for a win here. Boston comes in having won 3 in a row, and it's a lesser opponent, and there's some concerns I have. Achari's out of the lineup tonight. Wingles draws back in. Boston is either rotating their bottom 6 to rest guys, or they're not sold on their bottom 6. And I don't know which one of the two it is. I didn't mind their bottom 6 before they got Wingles, so I will trust Mike Sullivan. Or not Mike Sullivan. I will trust, he was coach of the Bruins way back when. I will trust Bruce Cassidy right now. That being said, I don't know. This one makes me a little nervous, and I could see Detroit coming in and scoring an upset. And if anybody says, like, Mike Sullivan didn't coach the Bruins, yeah, actually did. Didn't last very long either, and I didn't like him as a coach of the Bruins, which is kind of weird. Not all coaches don't just fit any team. Some of them just fit better with one team than another. Definitely didn't fit with Boston. And speaking of coaches, Blashill's got to feel at least a little bit concerned about his job right now. Him and Holland could both be cleaned out. If Detroit bottoms out and somehow finishes in the bottom 4, it gives them a better chance for a better draft pick. Might be what the team needs. They need a really solid blue chip prospect to add to this young roster. But we'll see, and we'll see if Boston has a letdown against a team that they should beat. That's what makes me concerned, is when it's, well, they should beat these guys. It's like, Montreal, 25-29-11. They're 3-3-4 in their last 10. Charlie Lindgren gets the start. They're 6th in their division. They're 5 points ahead of Ottawa. They're in New Jersey. Jersey's 33-25-8. The Devils are 5-5 in their last 10. Kincaid gets the start. They're 4th in their division, 3 points ahead of Columbus. So, Montreal's playing for pride. They, much like Detroit, sit below that 500 mark. And show that this division is past the top 4. It's pretty bad, but at least it's 4 now. At least there's 4 good teams and not 3, so it's progress. I kind of thought it was weird when I'm trying to think if it was during the post game interviews with Toronto. They talked about their division and they said, "Oh yeah, it's a tough division," and I thought, not by the records, it's not. Buffalo, Ottawa, Montreal, and Detroit all kind of look like they should be drafting early. So Montreal goes into this one tonight as a team that's having trouble scoring. The good news for them is Charlie Lindgren's been good since this call-up. Anybody surprised? Because I'm not. Kincaid's been better lately than he was earlier. I don't see this one as a high-scoring game. I see this one as a very low-scoring game. Probably a game with numerous chances, but from perimeter. I'm thinking more perimeter chances than up close. So you may see a bunch of shots in this one and not very many goals. For Montreal, they're playing out the string. The concern right now with Montreal has to be Carey Price. You know, you see these things going on with Carey Price and these injuries, and his $10 million contract kicks in next year, and I don't know. Goalies get big contracts and they become huge targets for fans and just for media in general. DiPietro probably had a decent middling career, but because he had that 15-year contract, everybody laughed at him. Luongo signs a 12-year contract in Vancouver, and suddenly he's under a massive microscope with every single save he makes. And Carey Price now is going to be one of those goalies that, because he's got the massive contract, he is going to be under that microscope. And the concern with Price has to be health as well. So that's a double whammy that you don't want if you're a Montreal fan. Next up, Vegas, 42-18-5, 6-3-1 in their last 10. Marc-Andre Fleury starting for them, and they're in first by 10 points. They're 10 points up on San Jose. Columbus, 33-28-5, will be their hosts. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10. Korpisalo starts tonight because Bobrovsky's out with an illness. I just figure the flu's going around right now. I'm seeing that a lot. The illness coming up for why players are missing games. Right now, Columbus is 5th. They're 2 points ahead of Carolina. They need this win tonight because I don't know how long Carolina's going to stay back. Might be for a while. Maybe they don't need the win. But, Columbus has gone from being a team that had really second was theirs, and now they're looking at 5th. They're looking at the last playoff spot and holding on for dear life, and maybe not being able to get that because suddenly Florida's become respectable, which was very rude, and they probably didn't ask their permission first. But tonight's game should look very... it should be fun because you've got the red, white, and blue on the one side and you got the Vegas Knights on the other. So, Vegas is coming off of that win against Jersey, of course, and Columbus really needs to get something going. And a win over Vegas would be a large step in that direction. But I can't go against Vegas. Vegas lost 3 in a row, which means now they have to win, I think, 15 in a row to make up for those 3 losses. Could just be ugly from here for the rest of the NHL. And Columbus is so wildly inconsistent. They're having trouble scoring. Their power play is still eh. And Korpisalo is a good goaltender, but if Bobrovsky's out for a couple of games, does that hurt them too? The pressure should really be on in Columbus right now because they need to get in the playoffs 2 years in a row. They need to at least have some semblance of upward momentum in the standings, and they have never had that as a franchise. Winnipeg's 39-17-9. They're 7-3 in their last 10. Steve Mason comes back tonight. So after a stint in the minors, he comes back up. Michael Hutchinson goes back to the minors. Winnipeg is second in the Central. They're 6 points ahead of Minnesota. The Rangers are 30-30-6. They're the hosts tonight. They're 3-6-1 in their last 10. But they've won their last 3. Lundqvist is probably the starter. They're 8th in their division. They're 1 point behind the Islanders. And yes, they are mathematically alive for a playoff spot. The odds of them making it, well, they have to go past the Islanders, Carolina, Columbus, and Florida to get there. So the thing that works against them somewhat isn't just that they're out and they're only a few points out, but it's the number of teams that they have to go past. Winning a game tonight against the Jets would go a long way towards that. While their road record before the last road trip, where Western Canada was gracious hosts, of course, their road record was poor. Their home record isn't bad. And so with Winnipeg having not lost, and I think it's been 6 games with a regulation loss on the road for Winnipeg now, they're probably due for a loss, just because that's the way the law of averages work. But I'm cautious about saying the Rangers are going to win 4 in a row because that just sounds weird to me. So I'll leave it up to you guys to make the decision on whether or not the Rangers can win 4 in a row. For me, it's I don't know. This to me looks like it could be a very lopsided game in favor of Winnipeg, but it's just strictly based on a gut feeling I have with the Jets and feeling like they're ready to go on a run now that they've added Stastny and they've got so much depth. And I think they'll play well tonight with Mason back in net. I think they're going to want to come out and score early and give their goalie some confidence in his first game back from injury. So, first NHL game back from injury. I'm worried he played in the American League. Florida. 32, 25, and 6. Their record keeps getting better. Much, much better. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They've won 6 in a row. Luongo's probably the starter. They're fourth in their division. They're now 8 points ahead of Detroit. Remember, they were lockstep with Detroit for a large part of this season, where they were both playing very 500, a little bit below, kind of a bad-looking team, and they've really turned it around. They're in Tampa. So here's their test. The Lightning are 45-17-4. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. Vasilevsky does get the start. Tampa's first. They're 6 points ahead of Boston. If you want a game of the night candidate, this is probably it. The dislike between Florida and Tampa should be on feature, I'll say, by early in the second period. And Florida absolutely can win this game. Florida's been playing really, really well. They've beaten some legit good teams in this winning streak. It's not like they've had a poor schedule. But that being said, they go back home after this one. They have games coming up against Montreal, against the Rangers, against, I think they got Buffalo too. They have a lot of games down the stretch against some poor teams. Teams that aren't particularly playing very well. I think they got the Islanders too. And a lot of home games over the next few weeks. Florida should solidify a playoff spot over the next 3 weeks. As long as they play as well as they've been playing, and as long as they don't play down to their opponents when they've got a lesser opponent coming in, Florida can make the playoffs. And if they win this game tonight, I'll start saying, so Florida's going to make the playoffs. Because from here on, their schedule really isn't that difficult. And it's weird because, you know, I knew they had a road-heavy schedule, but when I look at a lot of these home games they have coming up, and it's like they just had a big homestand, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. Because Florida could absolutely go on a run. They're not going to threaten Toronto. You know, Toronto's solid in third, but Florida's become a much better team over the last month and a half, 2 months, than they were early in the season. And they make the playoffs, they could be a very tough out. They could be a team that gives somebody headaches. Carolina, 29, 26, and 11. They're 3-5-2 in their last 10. Ward's probably the starter. They're sixth in the division. They're 2 points ahead of the Islanders. They're in Minnesota. Minnesota is very tough at home. 37-22-7. 6-3-1 in their last 10. Dubnik's the starter. Sealer's out with an undisclosed injury. I'll go out and say during that fight, which was probably the fight of the year, if you haven't seen the fight he had the other night, it was just a punch fest. You know, you see these fights where guys kind of tie up and then you see a couple of punches and then they go to the ice. And you're like, oh, that was a good fight. This was brutal. So I wouldn't be surprised if Sealer broke a bone in his hand and they didn't find out till after the game. But he's out for tonight. And Cunnin is out 6 to 8 months. So the debut of Luke being what it was and everything, he's out 6 to 8 months. So he won't be back for playoffs. They're third in the division. They're 1 point ahead of Dallas. And this game tonight against Carolina represents a game that they should win. They're at home. They have the great home record. But Minnesota has occasionally been poor in the last week. And this does make me a little bit nervous if I'm a Minnesota fan. Now, Minnesota's 1 point ahead of Dallas. I mentioned that, right? Now, Dallas was 2 points behind, and then last night they lost in overtime, which is a crying shame for those of us that are Stars fans. Because the other game of the night candidate could be Dallas going to Nashville. Now, Dallas is 37-23-6. They're 4-4-2 in their last 10. Lettinen's probably the starter because Bishop's out for a minimum of 2 games. Esa Lindell is still out with illness. They're fourth. They're 4 points ahead of Colorado, but they're in Nashville. Nashville's 42-14-9. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and those 8 are 8 in a row, all wins. Rinne is the likely starter for Nashville. They're 6 points ahead of Winnipeg. There's no pressure on Nashville right now other than the pressure they put on themselves. And that will likely mean their 9th win in a row. I mean, Dallas is coming off of a loss last night that's got a sting. You lose at home against Ottawa, that's got a sting, and now they go to Nashville. I want to say, oh yeah, Dallas is going to win this and everything, but Bishop's out, Lindell's out. That puts more stress on their blue line. I like Lettinen. I don't know if I like him being an emergency starter and McKenna being the backup. Yeah, McKenna got called up. So I have some concerns right now with Dallas. And their record over the last 10 has not been stellar. And it's getting harder and harder for me to look at this team and say, oh yeah, they're a contender. I mean, even the story of Klingberg being as good as it is and as good as it's been. Klingberg's lead and claim to being the best defenseman, even on points, is now in being threatened by Victor Hedman. And I would think by the end of this year we may see Klingberg. I think he'll get nominated. I think he'll be one of the top 3 vote getters for Norris. He is sliding out of first place for me, though. And it took a while for people to convince me that, yeah, no, he probably deserves that nomination and probably deserves the award. But right now, it just hasn't been there. And he has plenty of help with that. There were a couple of times last night where I saw Jamie Benn pass where I thought he should have shot it. But, Dallas just makes me concerned because they are a top-heavy team scoring-wise, and Nashville is Nashville. I don't have a whole lot to say about Nashville because they're winning all the time. There's not a whole lot for me to add when a team's winning all the time. Colorado, 35-24-6. They're 5-3-2 in their last 10. Varlamov starting for them. They're in 5th in their division. They're 1 point ahead of St. Louis. Chicago, 28-30-8. 4-6-0 in their last 10. Berube's probably the starter. They signed Tyler Sakura. So he signed a 1-year deal. He was one that I mentioned when I did the video about the Blackhawks going forward. And I understand that I haven't done videos on other teams, but for the teams that missed the playoffs, I'll do a going forward with them and what I think they're going to have to do over those 2 weeks until the first round's over, and then I can get into first round teams that have been eliminated, that kind of thing. But Sakura signing is big because he could have gone, as an NCAA player, he could have gone UFA had he not signed with Chicago. They're in 7th. They're 11 points behind St. Louis. This is a bad year for Chicago. You have to find the highlights wherever you can find them. Beating Colorado tonight would be a blow to Colorado's playoff hopes, but all it means is that then they don't have any games in hand on St. Louis, and they're only 1 point ahead. This is that last game in hand for Colorado. They are ahead of St. Louis. If they win this, it's a 3-point lead with 16 games to go. So it's a big game for Colorado, and Chicago has fallen 2 games below 500, much like Detroit. Over the last few weeks, I've noticed that when they fall below, they get back to 500, and then they fall off again. Yeah, I don't know. But for Colorado, this is another chance, too, for Nathan MacKinnon to cement his status as a legit Hart Trophy candidate, as a guy who can be viewed as the MVP in the league, especially if Colorado makes the playoffs a year after having 48 points. That would be absolute craziness, and yet here we are, and it could happen. And finally, last but not least, the Washington Capitals go in and play Anaheim. So the Capitals are 37-21-7 overall. They're 5-4-1 in their last 10. Holtby's probably the starter. They're 1 point ahead of Pittsburgh in first place in the Metro. Anaheim's 33-21-12. They're 6-2-2 in their last 10. Gibson's probably starting for them. They're 3rd place. They're 1 point ahead of LA. And they're right up there with San Jose. So that's 2, 3, 4 spot in the Pacific is really tightened up. And Anaheim wants to make their claim for 2nd. Winning tonight at home against Washington would go a long way for that. Washington, we've talked a lot about Ovechkin. Ovechkin's 40 goals. It's a good story. The problem for Washington has been there haven't been enough good stories, and they've had a middle-of-the-road record for the last month, which is why I have them. I noticed yesterday, I was looking at the power rankings for, I want to say TSN, that had them at 7th or 6th, and I thought that's way too high. Their play over the last month just hasn't warranted having them in the top 10. They skirt around it. I think the highest I've had them in any one given day was 12th or maybe 11th. But they just have not been able to consistently have the results needed for me to move them up that chart. Anaheim, on the other hand, has been kind of fantastic for the last month. They've had some results go against them, and yet here they are. They're in the playoffs. If the playoffs start today, and I really think they do make the playoffs. The Ducks are one of the better teams in the Pacific. They've proven that over the last 15 games, I'll say. And the Caps, I think you could make an argument for them being the best team in the Metro, but only if you're looking at the star players. You're looking at Holtby and net, Carlson on the blue line, and Ovechkin and Backstrom and these guys up front. But the depth, I do think, is the issue with Washington. I do think there's a lack of quality depth both on the blue line and up front. And it's the reason why I have a funny feeling Pittsburgh's going to win the division. And Philly could end up getting second if they can turn it around again. Philly is so hot and cold, who knows what you're getting from one day to the next. Anyways, those are your 9 games for tonight. Let me know what you guys think about the games and who you think's going to win and yada, 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 that kind of thing. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you're passing your way through and you just happened upon this video. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.